formalities at the beginning, and then we will move right into it. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I will gavel in virtually this hearing for the Boston City Council's Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. For the record, my name is Michelle Wu. I'm a City Councilor at Large and Chair of this committee. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV in accordance with Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public place that's open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the Council to carry out our responsibilities while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this meeting via live stream or via broadcast on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964. It will also be rebroadcast at a later date on these channels. So today's hearing is on docket number 0372. This matter was sponsored by City Councilor Leah Edwards and referred to this committee on February 4th, 2021. I am joined by my colleagues, the lead sponsor, of course, and then in order of arrival, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Bach, I believe Councilor Flaherty was here, I may come back, Councilor Braden. And so we will dive in for brief opening statements from colleagues and then hand it over to the administration for a presentation. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much. And thank you for hosting this hearing. I apologize for being a few minutes late. I think all of us are here because we, together as a body, we introduced a home rule petition. We filed it. And we worked really hard to make sure that we were really holding the ZBA accountable. It is an unelected body. It is an appointed body where its main function is to come up with exceptions to the rules, to our zoning code. And for many of us, they found that they have taken that as the exception to be actually their mission. And what we will find consistently throughout all of our neighborhoods is a frustration that people don't feel that they're heard, that the rules that they understand are supposed to help protect our neighborhoods or at least be negotiated around for substantial hardships are routinely ignored. And oftentimes the substantial hardships are the financial interests of developers coming into our neighborhoods. And so the frustration really is that we want the ZBA to do its job. But we also learned that the ZBA could do, needed some additional resources and needed to change who was on it and what was going on. So I introduced, a home rule petition that did a lot of things. And then Mayor Walsh took that home rule petition and took several components of it out and created an executive order. I was there at the signing with certain timelines for certain activities to happen by August of this year. And so I'm going to go through some of those timelines and those committed promises and recommitted promises shortly. And then as you know, the remainder in terms of the structure of the ZBA, in terms of term limits of the ZBA, is still pending at the State House. So again, within 45 days after the signing, we were supposed to have transition services and an ombudsperson to inform the public and answer questions. Within 120 days, according to the executive order, which would have been June 24th of this year, a scheduled meeting for the ZBA to discuss the creation of any written policies or protocols to facilitate efficient and predictable conduct of the ZBA proceedings. Within 180 days, which will be August 23rd of this year, we're to have a petition to amend Article 80 of the Boston Zoning Code to lower the threshold for requiring disclosures of ownership or beneficial interests in a property or project from 100,000 square feet to where it would apply to all or substantial majority of non-homeowner projects. So currently in the BPDA, if you have a large project and you are to disclose your ownership interests before you go through the Article 80 process, we're lowering that threshold so that we understand those ownership interests in some of the projects that are coming through the ZBA. We were also within that time frame by August 23rd, we're supposed to enable online payments and applications for permits and post physical and electronic link addresses to the board with instructions on how to submit testimony. Within 18 months, or would have been August 24th of this year, enable electronic submission of plans to ISD, enable email notification of notice to hearings, deferrals, and new hearing dates, enable electronic circulation of plans and petitions to be heard by the ZBA members prior to the hearing date, and update and improve existing online subscription lists for residents and other interested parties to receive updates on projects through email within specific regions, and improve and update existing databases. We also were asked that the ZBA have regular reports on on the variances, and at least informing us of what is the actual number of variances that are being given out by neighborhood. And we also wanted to make sure that the ZBA, and we did have this discussion, though I may not have made the executive order, a real understanding of whether the ZBA can function as it is, or does it have too much of a caseload on every other Tuesday that we might need to consider weekly ZBA hearings to allow for a breakdown and full conversation, and honestly, maybe considering even increasing the number of ZBA members, which we are trying also to do in the home rule petition. So the goal, honestly, was to improve the implementation of the ZBA. It was to make sure that more people could participate, as we learned in this moment in the pandemic. Translation and digital access is key, and we are fighting to make sure that we continue to have that access through our digital access ordinance. But the most important thing is that we need the ZBA to do its job. At the time of we also have pushed for the goal of the executive order to not only improve the implementation, but also with conflicts of interest and increasing transparency and efficiency of the board. At the time of the appointment to the ZBA, each member will disclose all of the properties or projects in which any of their business associates have business dealings. So we're interested in that and having that done. They also disclose any new properties or projects they may appear before the ZBA as soon as they know that they will appear before the board. It expands the 2-year prohibition on participating in or deciding on any appeal regarding a property in which they have an ownership interest or have received compensation for work on from 2 years to 5 years. It prohibits ZBA members from having any subsequent business dealings on any project or project on which they voted for 2 years. ZBA members will submit annual statements of financial interest. I do think we had asked about that actually during our budget hearings, if the financial interests have been submitted. ZBA members will undergo training in ethics and processes in Boston zoning code and principles of zoning law whenever appointed to be or are reappointed. So interested in how the training is going. Within 180 days, the Boston zoning, again, was to lower the threshold. And so essentially, I'm really excited to see how much of this has gotten done. I know much of it was recommitted in this budget process. It was part of helping me wanting to vote for the budget to get the funds to do it, to ISD, and to the key stakeholders to get all of this done, to at least make sure this aspect of the ZBA was running more efficiently, more with transparency, dealing with the conflicts of interest, and making sure we were very clear about who's buying in our neighborhoods and who's building in our neighborhoods. I understand it's a long introduction, Madam Chair, but this has been something I think many of us as councilors have heard about this organization and the BPDA more than any other in terms of complaints, concerns, and questions. So I wanted to make sure we were all informed about the commitments and the promises from the administration before we go in to find out where we are with them.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Very helpful framing. I will move the rest of us along to do actual opening statements. Councillor Flynn. Oh, and I want to recognize that Councillor Baker is here as well. Thank you. So the order will be Councillors Flynn, Bach, Flaherty, Braden, and then Baker.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, and thank you, Councillor Edwards, as well. I don't have an opening statement per se, but here to listen, but also to learn more about improvements and changes that we can make to ensure that the neighborhood process is clearly spelled out. Residents know exactly what to expect. Residents feel that their voice is important during this discussion at the ZBA and respected as well. And again, I'm here to learn more, and I want to thank Councillor Edwards and Councillor Wolf for their work on this as well. Councillor Flaherty too. Thank you, Councillor Wolf. Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, and thank you so much to Councillor Edwards for her leadership on this issue. I won't be able to stay for the whole hearing, but I just wanted to come and say that I think it's so important, really to give the work that we do meaning as the legislative body. The things that we pass have to then be implemented. And the same as, on the budget, when we fund things, if they don't come into being, then they weren't real in the end, right? And so I think often about the fact that we sort of do that front work, but are we doing the kind of like backup work to make sure that these things are happening? And I think it's something that that follow through is something that our residents expect of us. And so glad to be doing this hearing today. And I think we're all mindful of the fact that COVID has created lots of challenges for our departments, and there are things that have been inevitably delayed. But I think always as the council, we want to know what's the plan, how are we getting there, what are the barriers, and not sort of just shrug our shoulders or wave our hands about things that haven't gotten done yet. So grateful to you, Madam Chair, and to you, Councillor Edwards, and happy to be here today. And thanks so much to ISD for joining us as well.
Thank you, Councillor Barr. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Chairwoman Wu, and thank you to Councillor Edwards for sponsoring the hearing, as well as for outlining those critical issues so well a few minutes ago. I have long been a local and vocal advocate for the need for ZBA reform. The Zoning Board of Appeals process is outdated and opaque. It does not work for Bostonians, and too often favors developers from outside the city seeking variances at the expense of our neighborhoods, our communities, and their quality of life. In my own neighborhood, along with Councilor Flynn, we led a 2.5-year extensive rezoning process to modernize the zoning code in the neighborhood, and also to determine a shared vision for the future of the neighborhood. And unfortunately, every Tuesday, sort of willy-nilly, and depending on who you hire or who you know or whose sign you held, determines what variances happen. At the end of the day, we need to have a zoning board of appeals that adheres, that obeys, that follows, that upholds local zoning. So as each neighborhood rezones, and I know Councilor Braden is on the call, and she's looking to embark on rezoning for her district. When you have a neighborhood in a community process and you go through 2 years of rezoning, and then every Tuesday you see all that hard work and that effort in that time that went into rezoning and reshaping your community to protect your neighborhood's quality of life, just disregarded. And so that's really the focus, I think, should be clearly the membership piece of it, and the ethical piece of it, and the conflict of interest, all of that. That's the obvious. But until we have a zoning board of appeals that upholds and adheres to local zoning, we're going to continue to chase our tail here. The only variances that should be allowed every Tuesday are demonstrated hardships. Not that you overpaid for the parcel, not that you're going to lose some money on the speculative side of the market. Literally, it has to be a demonstrated hardship. There's an easement, or there's some stone ledge that you came across that you didn't realize was there. Those are sort of demonstrated hardships. Maybe expanding living space for a resident that their family is growing. Things like that, demonstrated hardships. When you have folks coming before the Zoning Board of Appeals with 8, 9, 11 variance requests, it's not only is it offensive, it would never happen in any other jurisdiction, but it happens here, and it has to stop. So we can continue to focus on this. And another thing, just lastly, to opine on it, when someone defers, they play the deferral game. When they defer, the onus should be put on the proponent to renotice the abutters in the community groups, and that doesn't happen. So we got a little bit of a sort of a bait and switch, play the deferral game, wait for no one to pay attention, wait for the summer months, defer, no new notices go out, and then there's a hearing, and then it gets approved, and everyone in the neighborhood's like, how the heck did that just happen? So those are my issues with the ZBA. We need to get them to focus on their job, which is to uphold local zoning and only allow variances after a demonstrated hardship, a true demonstrated hardship. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Braden's next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Councillor Edwards for her leadership on this very, very important issue. I echo the sentiments of my colleagues, especially Councillor Flaherty on this issue. I really am very concerned about the wholesale granting of variances. In the neighbourhood, I feel that sometimes when a speculator comes into our neighbourhood and sees a two-family house on a good-sized lot, they will plan to build 9 units of housing on it and expect to have all their variances granted without due respect for the concerns of the neighbourhood. And it's not that I'm against housing development. I'm absolutely pro-development, but it has to work for ordinary people and not just for speculative investors who are coming into our neighbourhoods. The issue about deferrals is really critical. I feel that it's very hard for the ordinary citizen to track when a project is going to come up for review again if it's been deferred. And it's basically a game of cat and mouse between developers and the neighbourhood to see if they can sneak in and get a hearing in front of the ZBA without adequate representation from the community. So all of these issues are of great concern, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Here to mostly listen, but also I want to pull permits to do an addition on my house. I'm probably going to have one variance. So if I hear this correctly, if I can't show a burden because I want to expand space, then my colleagues think that I shouldn't be able to expand in my house. Well, you're shaking your head there, Council, but that's what it sounds like to me. And what I've been through, I have a project that's almost directly across the street from me. It was a large site. It was a single family on 25,000 square feet. The developer designed it so he didn't trip any variances. It's the worst project that anybody would ever want to look at. There's nothing redeeming about it. So I think we have to tread lightly here. I see a lot of stuff being blocked at zoning now, and I can't figure out the reason for it. We have to be careful about investment in neighborhoods. My neighborhood is a neighborhood that's I believe benefited from the new investment that's coming into neighborhood. So I just ask that we tread lightly. One thing that I would say is I wish the zoning board members were full-time, so they had time to go through the content, so they had time to really look at the project, not just on Tuesday morning. But again, I would suggest that we tread lightly. And people are talking about not granting any variances. So if we were to rezone the whole city, then the developers would come in and not even look at us as a district council and say, no, you rezoned it, I can do 9 units here. That's what rezoning means to me. If we're looking at going in and rezoning because of our archaic zoning laws, which drive the developers in front of us as district city councils and at large if they choose to get involved. So I would like to tread lightly. That's all. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I think Councillor Baker is absolutely right to point out that there are multiple interconnected big issues here. And so, while and I'll go to the lead sponsor for one brief comment after this, but while the subject of this particular hearing is following up and just making sure as a council, we have accountability and oversight over the home rule petition and the particular transparency provisions that were filed about the ZBA. The zoning code itself and what the ZBA is operating off of is certainly a major concern. And, the intricacies of how long it's been for particular neighborhoods since their last rezoning. And, I don't want us to get too into the whole Pandora's box and to make sure that we can start here and, of course, keep going in terms of what this committee and this council will do. Councillor Edwards?
Just a note, I appreciate the comments from Councillor Baker. This is a check-in on the promises from the Walsh administration, then re-promises from the Janey administration for the executive order to do things that made the ZBA more efficient. That's the primary focus of this. And I think the frustration you're hearing is what I'm also going through also in East Boston. We had Plan East Boston, we kicked it off, and the planning stopped during the pandemic, but development didn't. And so people felt that they had committed to trying to see, envision and get a different form of zoning and different form of building and different way for families to come into East Boston. But what happened is that vision and planning stopped, but the variances and the constant building and the purchasing didn't. And so I think that that's the disconnect a lot of people feel. But I understand, and I too had to pull a permit, and I was denied to help in my own house. So I've been there too, Councilor Baker.
Thank you, everyone. We'll hand it over to Chris English and Brian Glasscock. Thank you for joining us. And you heard from the lead sponsor some of the questions we already have, so it'd be great if you could incorporate that as you're addressing, making your openings.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilor Wu, other city councilors here. My name is Chris English. I am the Chief of Staff for the Inspectional Services Department. Up front, just thank you for allowing me to speak today. I just want to give a presentation to update you on our progress. And at risk of repeating much of what Councilor Edwards so thoughtfully went through in her opening statement, I'd like to go through the measures that were included in the executive order one by one, just to let you know where we are and how we're doing with those. I'll jump right in. In February 2020, then Mayor Walsh signed this executive order that directed us to adopt several measures to improve transparency, efficiency, and operations with the Zoning Board of Appeal. The executive order, I think, is easily divided into two sections. One focused on improving ethics and transparency, including measures that require our members to disclose all of their properties and projects in which they have business dealings, ownership, interests, investments, and the like, that are likely to come before the Board of Appeal. These disclosures are done upon appointment to the board and on an ongoing basis as new cases come into the docket. The executive order also prohibits members and alternates from participating in or deciding on any appeal involving projects in which they've had ownership interests or received any compensation for 5 years prior to the date the appeal is filed with the board. It also prohibits members and alternates from having any subsequent business dealings with any project on which they voted for 2 years after they vote. This includes purchasing, investing, lending, construction, architectural work, marketing, and any other services for compensation. These prohibitions covering work before and after appointment to the board are more expansive than the requirements currently included in the enabling legislation of the board and under Massachusetts general laws. The executive order requires annual statements of financial interest from all members and alternates to be submitted to the city clerk. These are done by the end or right at the beginning of each fiscal year. The executive order also requires a comprehensive ethics training, as well as training in board processes, the zoning code, and the principles of zoning law. It's required at the time of initial appointment, as well as when members or alternates are reappointed, as well as on an ongoing basis for certain topics. Our next round of training is currently scheduled for September. We'll be covering board policies and procedures, open meeting law, a comprehensive ethics training provided by the State Ethics Commission. There will be principles of zoning law and relevant case law, and also on recent updates to the zoning code. I would want to add that, as part of this push for more ethics training, ISD also last year appointed an internal ethics committee that worked with the State Ethics Commission to develop mandatory training for all ISD staff, not just the administrative staff of the board or the board members, but every single employee of ISD. That expands beyond our training required by state law for all public employees and gives detailed information and guidance that's specifically applicable to the work that our staff does every day. The executive order also directs the city to work with the BPDA to petition the Zoning Commission to amend Article 80 and any other relevant provisions of the code to lower the reporting threshold for disclosures of ownership and beneficial interests in a property. We're working with our colleagues at the BPDA now on proposals in anticipation of publishing them with a public comment and review by the BPDA board. In addition to the ethics and transparency measures in the executive order, it also directs the Inspectional Services Department to modernize the board's operations and improve its efficiency through several different measures. Requires us to enable online application and payment for permits and petitions to the board. We implemented this last year and has been going well. Requires the posting of physical and electronic links to the board with instructions for residents to submit written and electronic testimony. This was also completed last year. Our hearing notices have been updated to include detailed instruction for submission of public comment. We've set up individual submission forms for each hearing that allow the public to select a specific case to provide feedback on. And we also set up a centralized email address, which is zbapublicinput@boston.gov, that the public can send written and digital testimony to. And all testimony submitted to the department is shared with board members prior to hearings. The executive order directed the department to enable the electronic submission of plans. Nearly all permit applications submitted ISD these days are done electronically through our online permitting portal. It includes the submission of electronic plans. The COVID-19 pandemic effectively accelerated the adoption of electronic plan submission by applicants. And the department is also in the process of implementing a comprehensive electronic plan processing and review solution that will allow our plans examiners and internal staff to more easily and efficiently accept, review, and provide feedback on permit applications. We've contracted with that. We received money in our past fiscal year budget for, and we are rolling that out now. The executive order requires the enablement of email notification for hearings and new hearing dates to anyone who signs up to receive those notices. That is done on an ongoing basis. It also asked to enable electronic circulation of plans and petitions to be heard by ZBA members prior to the hearing date. So this is another one of the improvements to the operation of the board that was accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic via the move to virtual hearings. And particularly the ability to share on-screen proposed plans and renderings for each case being heard by the board. So it gives the public better insight into specific projects. We have project proponents to share plans and presentations, including any revised plans with the board at least 14 days prior to the hearing date, so that we can ensure the board members have enough time to review them in advance of the hearing. The executive order also asks to improve the existing database of ZBA information so that it's searchable and contains all pending applications, deferrals, and decided petitions with decisions included. So last summer, we launched the first version of our online ZBA tracker, which allows anybody to have up-to-date information about pending and decided appeals. We put all of that information, including application descriptions, dates, statuses, number of deferrals, decisions, onto a searchable, filterable map so the public can easily access information about appeals near their homes, across the city, by status, by date, by application type. We've also updated the informational boards that we require job sites to post about their pending appeals, to include a QR code that you can scan with a smartphone and access the ZBA tracker directly. We are also directed to work with the Mayor's Office of Language and Communications Access to ensure translation services are available, including with assistive technology and/or staff. Our translation services are available for every hearing. We include in the hearing notices information related to how the public can request specific languages and or assistive technology. And in the coming weeks, our hard copy of abutters notices that are mailed out for each case will be including a Babel notice on the back in a dozen languages so that residents whose first language isn't English has better access to translation services. And finally, the order directed the department to designate an ombudsperson to answer questions and inform the public about board processes and procedures and assist during hearings. So currently ISD's Assistant Commissioner of Constituent Services serves as our ZBA ambassador and facilitates the public role in our hearings, especially our virtual ones these days. Beyond the executive order, we've been seizing on this opportunity to expand our outreach and education efforts. So we saw the order as a starting point for how we engage with our customers and the public, and have launched several complementary initiatives, including a zoning 101 workshop, which we hosted this past spring. That provided a general overview of how zoning works in the city, what zoning's all about, the ZBA process. We had several hundred members of the public participate. That workshop was recorded and is currently posted and available to view on our website. We also created a public guide to the Zoning Board of Appeal and the zoning process. This is a plain language version of a more formal policy and procedure manual for the board itself. This is available in 10 languages on our website, hard copy in our office here. We've also made accessibility options to added additional features to our website that includes written decisions, summary decisions for each case, full information about the schedule of hearings and where folks can find minutes and any other aspect you could think of for the board. And more information is always better. So we're looking to expand that as we continue moving forward. Finally, we've doubled the administrative staff for the board to include 2 new additional clerks and another paralegal. We also have additional administrative and technical positions in the works as part of our FY22 operating budget that will help lend better support specifically to applicants, especially first-time small project applicants at the beginning stages of submission, to help putting applications together and lend guidance on documentation requirements and the whole plan review process. So with the council's support, we hope to continue making improvements to the operations of the board. And, I would say our shared goal is to ensure that applicants and residents alike can have the confidence in that the Board of Appeal process is accessible and fair. That's sort of our status update on those measures. Happy to answer questions you have. I'm joined also by Brian Glascock from the BPDA. I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Very comprehensive as always. Appreciate your efforts and your leadership. Brian, would you like to add anything or open it for questions?
Don't have much to add. I wish I could take credit for even a fraction of the laundry list of improvements that ISD and Chris English and Sean Lydon and the good folks over there have been able to accomplish, and especially given that it was done under the unusual circumstances of the pandemic. But I think what our agency can do is try and be helpful and complement the technical improvements there. At the same time, Chris has rolled out the ZBA tracker. We've tried to make some improvements to our zoning viewer online tool to help people understand what the zoning is for a given address and give them access to other related things like sea level rise, for instance, and flood resilience, historic preservation, and those things, and make that a more useful tool for folks, as well as project trackers for anything going through the Article 80 process. And like you all, we receive constituent calls, every day. Someone's calling with a question about this. And so we've sort of made it, our policy to try and make sure that, we don't just hand them off to somebody else or send them to 311. We try and track down, the answer to their questions about, a particular project or something that's going to the ZBA or something that's been to the ZBA, so that, when we're, we don't just hand them off. We try and resolve the issue for them and get them the information that they want.
Thank you very much. Great. I know Councillor Braden had a time commitment. Did you want to ask any question, Councillor Braden, before you jump?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the very detailed report by Chris English, and I will review the tape later. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll open it up to questions from colleagues now, starting with our lead sponsor, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much for getting back and also the thorough presentation. I did want to ask, where can folks sign up now for notification?
They can email the board currently, or reach out to the ZBA ambassador. So zba.ambassador@boston.gov.
And they would be able to get their plans electronically?
Yes.
For all the projects now pending?
We can share specific plans, or we envision adding additional features to the ZBA tracker that will be able to link to particular information beyond what's already there. And I think that's something we'd love to explore, adding directly to that tracker. I think a centralized location where people can find the information that they're looking for whenever they need it is probably the best way to go. But certainly open to working that out with your input and advice.
Thank you. With regards to the threshold disclosures, I know we had talked about this. So I guess my when is there going to be a proposed zoning amendment? Because that's what does it. It lowers the threshold to the zoning amendment. So I don't know if you or Brian Glasscock can answer who is going to be introducing the zoning amendment to the zoning commission.
I think so. We're sort of working through that now, and some complications that we've been thinking about, as far as how it's operationalized, and not only that, but actually, the specifics of language. So right now, we've been doing a lot of digging into the number of projects that come before the board based on square footage. And how we would, and the type of project it is, and how we could lower the threshold to incorporate all but those small homeowner projects per the intent of the executive order.
Right. Just to add a little context, I know that was one of the back and forths that we had. Initially, we didn't want everybody who, for example, was just adding a dormer. Why would, and I thought where we landed was if it was an investment property, it was not owner occupied, and an LLC was trying to get variances, that the ownership disclosures of that LLC would be part of that threshold transparency. And so I guess I want to confirm that we have a threshold, that we agree on the same thing. And then again, I hate to double down. When is it going to be introduced to get it done? This was I think it was within 120 days actually. So it was actually as of June or a little earlier this year that this was supposed to be introduced, at least in the zoning commission.
So the threshold right now is based on square footage. Lowering the threshold or changing the way it's written so that it's not targeted to square footage, I think is a little complicated. I'm not the zoning expert, sort of on how the language is written. I don't know, Brian has any.
Right. So, one of the things, one of our concerns when we first started looking at that was, how do we don't want to be drinking from the fire hose on this one. This is going to be a little bit of a heavy lift for us. We thought about, using, modeling it after and sort of paralleling the language that we use in large project, small project review. So drop the square footage down to 20,000 square feet. So now we're catching that and do this as sort of a two-step process. Start doing that right away because we think that's a manageable amount of information to bring in, and we can then make that public fairly easily. Getting down into the finer grained level of projects to include the LLCs, counselors, as you point out, that might be, one or two units even in some cases. But to not catch, to exempt essentially owner-occupied projects, up to say 3 family. So that might be the sort of the next step. But there's an awful lot of those, and as we get into that, we're going to have to do a lot of public education. You're talking about a different set of consultants and contractors and lawyers. There are very different scales. So the ones operating the larger scales, this shouldn't be a heavy lift. But for the contractor that's maybe doing, a small project every 6 months or so, this is going to be new territory. So we're trying to figure out what the best.
I'm going to try and push. I'm trying to. I know we're all in new territory. I mean, we're post-pandemic where we are, so I'm acknowledging that. But I do want to just note the point is this is the process this is trying to replicate is one that already exists, where when someone applies under Article 80, they disclose who they are, who their LLC membership ownerships are. So that's the lift. Is that when they apply for zoning variance and they're in front of the ZBA, they would be exposing who they are. And we confirm with lawyers that knowing the ownership interest does not prevent those individual owners from having the liability shield, which is what LLCs provide, correct? That is not what it does. It simply informs us. And the reason why it was necessary that we have it done this way, especially even for non-occupied smaller projects, is because and I'll just use my name, Lydia Edwards is able to purchase up all these little triple deckers and create a different LLC name for it. It's LME1, LME2, those are my initials, LME3, whatever. And collectively, I'm able to displace and do a lot of things and build around and ask for all these different variances. Heck, I'll even use the one variant I got from the project next door as precedent, saying, well, it was allowed or I got it done. And LLC after LLC with lack of transparency that allows for this to happen. And it's me the whole time, or it's some one individual or a group of investors the entire time. So I think the lift is actually just make it part of the application. But in order for it to be part of the application where people say my ownership interest is Lydia Edwards, 100% sole owner of this LLC, we need you to lower the threshold in the zoning code. And so that's it. I mean, I don't know what the heavy lift is otherwise. I mean, if I'm that much of an investor, I'm able to move in and out of different neighborhoods and different neighborhood associations and getting all these variances, I'm going to be able to put my name down on a piece of paper if I own something or who the ownership interests are. And it's vital that we know, because it's harder for me to get away with more things. And again, I'm just using myself as an example for the public who are watching. I'm not actually doing anything, but I just, not to call out anybody, but just to explain that is the goal. And we've had, that was part of the executive order goal. And it's not been introduced, even language to do that. So the complication isn't, you have language already exists. Lower the threshold for non-occupied property, and then they can just say who their ownership interest is. If you find that they're owner occupants, they don't need to expose that. If I'm, as a senior, have my house in a trust or an LLC where I'm the beneficiary, and I'm owner occupant, I don't need that.
So I would say a complicating factor is the disclosures currently made for Article 80 are not made to the Inspectional Services Department. Those are submitted to the BPDA. So we're talking about a whole list of other projects that don't go through the BPDA at all. So it's a different sort of repository, I guess I'd say. Secondly is how applications are submitted to ISD. Many homeowner projects have their applications submitted by their contractors, which would show up possibly as an LLC as the applicant. The owner information isn't collected currently. We have applicant name. So it's sort of an operationally speaking, how do we divide out between what is a homeowner project using a contractor versus what is a project being applied for by sort of an investor, right? Because the homeowners can't apply for their own permits. There's a waiver of the requirement to have a licensed professional apply for the permit.
For 2 and below.
That's correct. Yep. So we do accept that, but many homeowners just have their contractor or even their architect or another representative submit their applications on their behalf, generally because they know the process and they know how to do it. So it's sort of some of those little intricacies that I think we just have to figure out how to operationalize.
I understand. Operationalizing and actually changing the law can happen at the same time, though. And so what hasn't happened is a filing of an amendment to change the law. And I know that process takes time. So I'm asking for a commitment to introduce that, change the law. And I understand ISD will have to adjust its application. I mean, you're adjusting everything else according to the executive order. You've had to adjust your notifications. You've had to adjust other things as well. You've had to operationalize language inclusion. You've had to operationalize the ombudsperson. So operationalizing to change is what you do. But I'm asking why the change hasn't even been proposed.
I don't have a great response for that.
Okay. Would you be willing to work with my office if we were to propose that language?
Absolutely.
All right. I know my other colleagues may have questions. I will just go ahead and do that.
Thanks, Councillor Edwards. Let me see who is left. Several colleagues have to jump off. Councillor Flaherty.
Nothing further at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have several people who are interested in testifying as well, so I won't hold this up too much. And I anyway, can follow up with Councillor Edwards' push separately. Let me go to the list. And in the meantime, Chris or Brian, is there anything else that you feel we haven't covered that's important for us to know or to be thinking about?
No, only to say, if ideas come up for additional improvements or how we can continue to iterate this, because, modernization is an iterative process, and, the executive order is sort of a static document that says do these things, but we want to make sure we're being responsive to that. So we're happy to take that input, that feedback, and see what we can do to it.
Yeah, and when we have something to respond to at the zoning commission, we'll make sure that it gets scheduled as quickly as it can be. I think one of the things that we generally need to do with any zoning amendment is some level of public process, and I think today's meeting is part of that. So I'm sort of interested to hear what if there is some input from the the greater public on this, then what do they want to see, and how can we create a tool that is useful for the average person. We don't want to have something that we're going to have to wade through. And we want the information to be able to be presented in a way that's useful for the practitioners and for the average person alike.
Wonderful. So for Chris and Brian, do you have time commitments? Are you able to stay for a bit longer as we open it up for public testimony?
Sure.
Okay, thank you both very much. So what I'd like to do, if Councillor Edwards is amenable to the schedule as well, is I'd like to, right now we have 10 folks ready and waiting to testify. So I'd like to get through the first half, and then we'll open it back up for questions that may have surfaced through this remarks, and then anything else from our lead sponsor, and then we'll do the second half and then close out. Great. Okay. So the order that I have is, oops, sorry, I lost my document. We'll double check if everyone is here. So first up is Ellen Hume, and I will add folks to the main. Oh, Carrie, I'm sorry, I don't have the ability to move folks into the room, but I see you are, so thank you. Ellen Hume, Victor Bronya, Thomas Schiavone, and Nat Taylor are the first four. I will go to five. And Elliot, is Elliot Laffer here? And Elliot Laffer. So those will be the first five. And if everyone could kindly introduce yourself, your address for the record, and I will gently keep us to 2 minutes if that's possible per person. Ellen.
Thank you so much. I'm Ellen Hume, 20 Charleston Street in the North End. And I want to thank, first of all, Chair Michelle Wu and our Councilor Lydia Edwards. I also want to thank Councilor Flaherty for saying a lot of what is on our minds. I will be extremely brief, but I represent a lot of neighbors, and we've been waiting over a year to tell this story, and having you hear it is very important to us, so please bear with me. The first ask that we have is that you please refuse to reappoint the current ZBA chair and other members now serving on the board. Also, please do change the system to make it work for the city's taxpayers, not just its tax base and out-of-town developers. There's some very big projects pending in the North End and the waterfront, and we're very worried that the abutters and the existing people there are going to suffer what we went through just in January of this year. I'll be extremely brief, but I will tell you that that I think that Councilor Baker especially needs a reality check on how the ZBA is actually working. We're waiting for a moment when the Boston mayor and city council insist on a lawful zoning process, and we did not experience that. We in the North End worked for over a year in good faith with our city council members and our community groups, and we opposed a design of a condo development in the former St. Leonard's Rectory. And it was a very controversial issue because no one in the community spoke in favor of it. We did want to have a good condo development in this historic building, which is registered in the Massachusetts Historical Directory. But what we went through is instructive to what you guys are trying to figure out on how to fix the ZBA process. So I just want to give you a few details. Our community groups, which never agree on anything, agreed on this. The design was not appropriate for this very sensitive building. 6 luxury condos sounded like a great idea. We were behind that idea, but building a new story on a building that literally was built over hollow underground passageways raised really serious structural issues. The developer refused to do any structural analysis. And we also had big fire safety concerns because there had been 2 fire fatalities within the last few years on Hanover Street in a similar brick building. So we asked that they have more than just one staircase. We asked that they have some fire exit that was more than just the one exit. We asked for perhaps other mitigation measures, and they blew us off. And they said, we're sprinklered, one stairway is fine. So in a 5-story walk up with 6 condos, we were really worried about safety issues. To make a long story short, they needed a lot of variances to get this approved. They offered no storage, no parking, nothing to mitigate the density that they were proposing. Well, that was what was before the zoning board. The ZBA postponed the rectory hearing 5 times in a row between 2019 and 2021 all at the request of the developer and the ZBA staff, with no advance warning to abutters, no explanation, and no recognition that we'd been waiting in large numbers each time to testify. I'll be very, very brief, but tell you that when the hearing finally happened on the 6th date, January 12th, none of the real abutters was allowed to speak at all. It was only the developer, the ZBA chair, praised the developer's stack of support letters, which were identical form letters signed by people we don't know, most of whom don't live in the area. And those of us who do, directly facing the property, were not allowed to speak at all. Our stack of real letters wasn't acknowledged. The hearing took 11 minutes. The ZBA chair, after hearing from the developer, gavelled the vote to approve the rectory project with no discussion or roll call. Please hear this, Councillor Baker. Clearly, the issue had been decided in advance behind closed doors based on politics and money. The merits of the case were not considered. So here's the punchline of the whole joke. The final ruling, as they wrote it up, contained material factual errors. They said there had been 5 prior hearings discussing the project, and you know they had all been canceled. The lawyer told us we would have to pay a minimum of $30,000 to appeal this, even just to correct the factual errors, get due process of law, and get the case reconsidered, or make the ZBA accountable. So in conclusion, I have to say, we're very dismayed, even after the great efforts by Lydia Edwards and you, Councillor Wu, to resolve the issues for the community. We did not see that in action on January 12th, and we're very deeply disturbed. And we think that faith in our city's government is really suffering. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Next is Victor.
Okay, I should be unmuted now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Unfortunately, I don't think I can do this in 2 minutes. Perhaps I should ask for a deferral and take me at the end. What would you suggest? I have a list of 10 items to discuss. What I'm prepared to do is to discuss specific issues with the ZBA's procedures that I think are wrong and need to be corrected, and then go to a general general discussion of the future and how to make things better.
So Victor, well, if you have written comment, feel free, if you want to email it to me, michelle.wu@boston.gov, I can make sure the whole council gets it and it's entered into the record. So we'll have the whole thing. And if you wanted to do that now, and then we can take you at the end and you can do a just sort of summary version of it. But it'll be the near, about 2 minutes now or later. So up to you in terms of you want to take your spot at this moment or go at the end.
Well, let me do it later because some of the items may have already been discussed by others.
Perfect.
So I can move more quickly.
All right, that sounds good. And please email anything. I can forward it around as well. So then we'll jump to Thomas.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Counselor? I'm Thomas Schiavone. I'm a 47-year resident of the North End. I live at 46 Snow Hill Street. I've been thinking and I've been listening to the previous remarks. I'd like to just ask a couple of questions, but not necessarily getting the answers. But I'd like to know why consistently the Zoning Board of Appeal in the North End has approved 9-unit residential developments, given variances, when we know that they purposely have been doing this, not just in the North End, but throughout our city, to avoid the threshold of the inclusionary housing. I'd like to know why, it perhaps works in other neighborhoods, but why basement expansions have been allowed, which removes washing machines and dryers previously from the tenants, young families with infants, strollers, young people moving into the city who do not bring in cars, but they bring in bicycles. And I've stood outside the chamber of the city council and heard some landlords crowing about the fact that they make people drag their bikes up the stairs and the strollers up the stairs. This spikes transigency. We are bearing witness in the North End to a diaspora. We're losing our neighbors, and it's the affordable housing piece. Now, you can't lay gentrification all at the feet of the Zoning Board of Appeal, but when the Airbnb, and we saw what was happening, curiously, the Airbnb, why did they approve architects' plans and developers' plans where you knew that each of the 3 or 4 bedrooms had their own bathroom and very small common areas? And this certainly was not housing. They called it multiple family housing. And a question would be, why was that allowed? Did anybody see it? Did anybody raise their voice? This has demoralized us. And we have had to bear witness to tones of arrogance. I'm not accusing the people of being arrogant. I'm talking about the tone. This is how our citizens, this is how our residents see their municipal government, see their elected officials and their appointed officials. We've seen arrogance. They've been brusque. They've been callous. They've been dismissive. They've been contemptuous. Disrespect for due process, as Ms. Hume has already explained to you. It's demoralizing and it's disempowering. And those of us who care about the fate of our neighborhoods, and we have a neighborhood, some city officials have had the gall to come to our meetings and call us an economic engine. But the reason why people find the North End and other neighborhoods in downtown Boston livable is because we care about it, because it's safe, because we watch out for things. The ZBA has undercut us in this. And to tell you the truth, my question to ask is not what they've submitted for their disclosures and the ethics. Why do they want to be reappointed? What can they say that they have done, that they have seen, that they have contributed, besides processing sausages in these dozens upon dozens of long docket lists and just racing through them? Why have they not asked for more staff? Why have they not sought other days to have these hearings? But that is what I basically want to say. But I did want to put out a warning for the city councilors. You send your staffs down when you can't go down, and these young people pop up out of their chairs or off the side where they're leaning against the walls, and either they're for or against it. And then the councilors who are thoughtful and want to take a neutral position, because they don't see this as being a political issue. It's a development issue, and it's between neighbors. If they take a neutral position, then the Zoning Board of Appeal looks at that and says, oh, the council is not there. He or she doesn't care about this project. And so they will go blithely along their way. And I cannot tell you the damage this does to our respect, certainly for the Zoning Board of Appeal, certainly for the BPDA, certainly for the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, because those 5 deferrals that Ms. Hume spoke about, people took time off from work. Some of them got childcare. And why does the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services with the ZBA, they know and the developers know that on that morning there's going to be a deferral, and we lose time from our children and from our work. So I'm sorry, I really am upset about this because it's demoralizing, and it does not cast a good light on the council. And I don't say that to be disparaging, but it sends the wrong message. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Nat, and who will be followed by Elliot and then Martin. Oh, Nat, I saw you were just reconnecting to audio. You're up if you are able to speak.
Wonderful, thank you. I think I had a hot mic there for a second, and I apologize. I'll make a brief comment, which is just the obscurity of the current ZBA appeal process dissuades ordinary people from participating based on the conversations that I have as secretary of my neighborhood association. So I appreciate the changes the ZBA has made in the last year, like the tracker and the other digital improvements. I just want to advocate for finishing the executive order. It should be straightforward to sign up for email. I think sending an email, like having to know to send it to some address and then not knowing what to send should be fixed. The latest published minutes that I see are from May, so it can take months or weeks for things to get published, and that's confusing and should be taken care of. Like maybe it could be automated. And the tracker doesn't include things like which articles require relief. So when you really want to look at interesting pieces of the data and aggregate, like how much open space are we losing due to zoning variances, it's very difficult because that data is not in a structured format that can be easily consumed. And so I think if the executive order were finished, it would really remove that obscurity and let ordinary people participate, and also make them more interested in participating since they feel like they were in the know. Thank you. Oh, Nat Taylor, 158 Cottage Street, East Boston.
Thank you very much. And under time, good job. Okay, Elliot.
Hi, I'm Elliot Laffer. I'm chair of the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay, and I've also spent a lot of time testifying in front of the Board of Appeals over decades. And the board has an impossible job. It has an impossible job because we have decided in Boston, for some reason, that the zoning code is advisory. It shouldn't be easy to get a variance. And I'm sympathetic to Councilor Baker's point about not needing it, but there's a requirement. Variances, I was always taught, are supposed to be assumed a no. You're not supposed to assume you're going to get them, and you certainly shouldn't have an assumption in the paperwork that gets presented. What is the zoning relief that this project needs? Most projects shouldn't need zoning relief, but we assume that they do, and we treat variances the same way that we treat conditional use requests, where conditional use is, if you meet the conditions, you ought to get the approval. And so the negotiation is about, well, do they really meet these conditions that protect the neighborhood around them, like a restaurant that might have odors and you want to make sure that it won't do that. A variance is not supposed to be approved unless there's a site-specific reason that is different from all the other buildings in that same area that mean that it can't meet the code. And to the extent that we don't enforce that, what we wind up is a group of people who listen. I mean, I just took a look. Last week's Board of Appeals had 30 applications on it. 22 were for variances. If you took 10 minutes for each of those 30 applications, that's a 5-hour hearing. And that's 10 minutes. That includes the time that the board, that the applicant presents, that the board asks questions, and that the public comments. It's an impossible circumstance. And I think whether or not one feels that the current board members do well, and I think most of them work hard and have tried to do a really good job, they can't succeed. And until and unless we reform the idea that we're going to zone by exception and we have a zoning code that means something, this is never going to work right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, last one for this round, Martin, and then we'll go back to the sponsor for questions, and then we'll get everyone else in right after that. Martin Roeder, are you available?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and Councillor Edwards in particular for sponsoring this motion, and the other councillors. My name is Martin Roeder. I'm a resident of the Back Bay and a member of the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay. I agree with Elliot Laffer's comments about the fact that the ZBA, for all its obvious faults and the weaknesses in its procedures, nevertheless is faced with doing an impossible job. But I'd also like to speak on behalf of the Alliance of Downtown Civil Organizations, whose chair, Ford Cavallari, did submit written testimony. And that testimony includes 9 points and 7 preliminary recommendations or suggestions for improvement. I won't go through them all. Ford, by the way, cannot testify today because of an unfortunate death in the family. Among the 9 points, I'd just like to draw your attention to a few of them that are particularly significant, it seems to me. One is that the ZBA combines what should be relatively routine consumer or homeowner issues with all kinds of matters that involve problematic policies like electronic signs and the city's short-term rental policy. Secondly, large corporations in particular are able to exploit the ZBA by creating policy-busting precedents, which they are then prepared to exploit by litigation, which certainly creates fear and concern in the city about the consequence of that if comparable projects are denied. The city, regrettably, has been lax in establishing clear directions and instructions for the ZBA. And furthermore, and this is something which extends beyond the city but involves the state as well, the BPDA, well, the MBTA, state and state organizations can bypass the ZBA process entirely, for example, as happened with electronic signs at the Seaport, North Station, a number of MBTA parcels. So having said all that, our initial discussions internally have led to a number of particular suggestions. One of the most important ones is that we believe there should be separate homeowner and business industry ZBA processes, and with the latter being considerably less open to gaming by well-financed, strong national and multinational organizations, including elimination of deferrals, this technique that is constantly used to wear down opposition from residents. In particular, also, the city should consider handling separately the very esoteric business-oriented zoning issues, such as those associated with biolabs, a growing number of which are now being proposed, which I think are completely beyond the competence of the ZBA. There needs to be clearly a higher bar overall for requesting a variance, and all applicants, especially for forbidden uses, need to be extremely limited in the deferrals that they can require. We also think, by the way, that the track record of a business developer, such as labor law violations, failure to pay taxes, no-fault evictions, tenant harassment, etc., should be part of the record. And finally, that the sign code should be separated from the zoning code, and billboards should be regulated and managed by environmental transportation departments rather than the ZBA. We're particularly concerned about two immediate risks to residents and to the fabric of neighborhoods, which are posed by the efforts by many property investors to use executive suite conversions as a way to circumvent the short-term rental ordinance. And their intent has been made clear by a recent application by Sonder, one of the worst offenders, to have one specific provision removed from its use of executive suites, namely the provision that there should be a 4-night minimum stay. So clearly, therefore, they intend to use these executive suites for short-term stays for all comers. And that's something which should be stopped. Secondly, there's a mounting number of applications for digital billboards, which are horrible for many respects. So one thing we're wondering if the city could do, the administration immediately, is to issue clear, firm instructions to the ZBA to reject, to deny any and all such applications within these two categories, as well as, of course, deal with the issue of deferrals, which is one of the most frustrating aspects of trying as residents to mount effective opposition, sensible, serious opposition to proposed projects that we believe will be harmful to residents and to neighborhoods. ADCO really wants to help make the CBA work. We believe that this will require serious consideration of all the issues raised in this hearing, and no doubt by other people as well. We are working quite closely with a growing number of other neighborhoods to improve the way in which we can oppose where justified or support where justified issues that come before the ZBA. And in particular, I'd like to point out to the councillor that the way things are set up, it's tough enough for a neighborhood with as much capability and resource and experience as the Back Bay to deal with these issues. It's even more difficult for the so-called environmental justice communities. So we believe that this is a citywide issue, and we are doing our best to work together with all neighborhoods to make sure that our interventions can be as helpful and fruitful as possible, whether in support or indeed in opposition. Thank you very much for the opportunity to give this testimony.
Thank you. May I invite Chris and Brian back and just see first if you had anything specific you wanted to respond to in terms of the points that have been made. And then I know Councillor Edwards has a few more questions as well.
Not especially, but I do want to just mention that BPDA has a pretty solid track record of opposing electronic signage. But one of the things that this sort of points out is the recommendations that we make, that you as city councilors make, as the mayor's office of neighborhood services make, don't always get adhered to by the ZBA. They're an independent body. They make their own decisions. We make recommendations, and they are free to accept or reject those. But we do oppose electronic signage when that comes up.
Thank you. Chris, anything to add?
There's a lot of really great feedback here. And a lot of stuff for us to consider, just sort of on the operational side, but from a policy perspective as well. I think, take this home and continue to figure out ways to improve. I think a lot of it is a difference between sort of what the content of the code is versus what sort of the administrative and the operational procedures are. So there's definitely obviously room for improvement everywhere, but I think much of the frustration comes down to the content of the code versus.
Well, if I may lift up just one piece of it that I think I would be curious to hear how your respective agencies are thinking about it as we're in some ways transitioning through the pandemic, but still very much in the midst of having to think about hybrid and virtual public conversations. The fact that it's been frustrating from many angles. I've heard from neighborhoods and constituents about the webinar format where folks then can't access chat, can't see who else is there, can't see who's being called on to testify, sometimes are not called on to testify at all and can't do anything about it. As we are moving towards some mix of in-person but retaining some hybrid or remote, how are you thinking about those pieces of that and mitigating that feeling of being completely disempowered?
Sure. No, great point. We're working on figuring out how we go back to the in-person hearings without losing that sort of access and which I'm sure I know the council is considering with your hearings and your meetings. The BPDA board is the same. I think we want to maintain. I think there are a lot of great features to the virtual hearings that need to be maintained. Presentations on screen and allowing the public and presenters to be able to share images and renderings and things like that during the hearing actually makes it more accessible. There's aspects of both in-person and virtual hearings that we'll definitely want to maintain. I think it's sort of just we figure out each piece and how it's important. We want to make sure people can get to hearings whatever way they feel is best for them.
Yeah, we're struggling with the exact same thing. Early on, the public participation, we try to re-engage with folks and use different formats, trying out Zoom and Google Meets and some others. Participation was low and people were very frustrated, but over time, it picked up to the point that we were actually getting more participation. The problem is it's different participation. So there are groups that weren't able to make the digital jump or weren't comfortable in that that environment. So as we go to more live meetings, we want to make sure that, we pick those folks back up again, but don't lose the new people that got involved who hadn't previously been involved because they couldn't take time out of their lives to go to a community meeting at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock on a school night. And so we had people feeding their kids, and then jumping into these community meetings that otherwise would have been left out. And so we want to try and bring those two worlds together. And there's no instruction book, so we're experimenting like everybody else.
Great. We will make sure to follow up on that. And it certainly wasn't just at the city level. I've been quite frustrated with how the MBTA was handling their meetings as well, where before, if you just showed up, you were guaranteed to speak. And now it was dialing a number and they would choose a certain representative sample of voicemails to play, et cetera. So thank you for your attention to that. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. I wanted to address a lot of neighborhood individuals, but especially several of the folks here who are from the neighborhoods that I represent. So I think what they have not gotten and what they rightfully deserve is an apology. On behalf of the chair on behalf of the institution of the ZBA, you are owed an apology. I have heard many times about the way people have felt chewed up and spit out by coming to talk about their homes, the future, and changes that are permanent. And while you may not get everything you want in any process, we are adults, we understand that. In no way, shape, or form should a process that's funded by your tax dollars be disrespectful to you. In no way, shape, or form should you feel that it was a waste of time or that you don't believe in government because government did not even acknowledge you or treat you with the dignity that you deserve. So I am apologizing for that treatment. And I heard it from Tom's testimony. Because of that, it has made our body as a city council look less effective. And it's making, I think, the belief in city government even less, it looks more damaging. So first, I will acknowledge that. And I do think that it is worth, in the trainings that do come, this is to the ISD chair, this is to BPDA, but as the trainings do come up, if we are serious about access and if we're going to have and say this, that we want to keep this kind of hybrid model up, then having access for people to be further disrespected isn't good. Having access where people feel that their voices matter, where they can have participation. I look forward to the day when the projects are online. And again, as we noted, you can click on there, submit your email, be given the notice continually about the deferment in the morning or the day before so that you are not taking time off of work. I look forward to people being able to have comments on the projects in public for folks to see that well in advance of the hearing. These are ways in which you provide access points where a person speaks purely and honestly and without a time limit necessarily, because they can write what they want, and it's still available for folks to see. So I think the best thing we can do, again, not promising we can give everybody what they want, when they want, or how they want, but promising that they will be respected going forward. And I think that that's something that if the chair of, or any member of the ZBA is not providing that sense of respect and dignity, then I do agree with questions about how long or how much we're going to allow for someone to serve in that capacity. Now, on to some additional components of the executive order. The variance reports. I think that was something we also wanted, was collecting data on the variances. I think Nat Taylor brought up some data points, but those reports by neighborhood and a breakdown, are they coming out so we can actually have an understanding how many variances are happening in East Boston? And if so, what kinds of variances? And so, I have constituents who are less concerned about the FAR if you're just trying to put a basement in your apartment, and they're more concerned about how many height restrictions or how many height variances are we giving out, and in what parts of East Boston. So I would like to know where that lives and where that process is going. You have my commitment, Commissioner English, to get you some language to work with for the zoning LLC.
Sure.
And there's also some written policy trainings that the secretary of the ZBA was supposed to do as well. I think the executive, if she considered creation of any written policies or protocols for proceedings and decision making. By that, I mean, what's the standard for the decision? Is it just motion and then everyone just understands by tone, we're going to go with this? Or is there an actual motion, reconsideration? There's no notes. There's no scorecard like you have with the Boston Cannabis Board. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Those are my concerns. And I did want to acknowledge that I've heard from many people from various different neighborhoods a consistent concern about the treatment when they say take the time, hours of their day off to come and speak and be told, if you say what anyone else says, your voice doesn't matter. I don't think that's ever a response. I don't think that's ever anything a government official or someone who represents a part of our city government should ever say to anybody. What you say is repetitive and therefore is not important. That's not how a government should work.
Couldn't agree more, Councilor. Say on the quarterly reports, I think that's something that was included in the home rule, not the executive order. So we've sort of been in anticipation of that home rule moving forward, laying the groundwork to be able to do that more on an automated basis right now. Each application, we know what zoning code violations are issued by our department. That's what we issue. And then on the back end, it's sort of incorporating what the feedback from the hearing is, any provisos that are added to that. So that right now it's not in a format that's easily uploadable to the ZBA tracker. That's kind of where we've struggled with that. I know we want to put way more information up on the tracker, but so it's a lot of back-end technological process, but in progress. I don't have a definitive timeline on that for you.
Okay.
You had other comments, questions?
And the written policies and protocols, I know that they.
So the policy and procedure manual is, I think, in its final stage of drafting to be adopted by the board. It's currently about 30 pages long with another 100 or so of appendices. That will be, we had a business meeting last year with the board. I think that was over the summertime to sort of discuss this. And it's gone through some iterations and feedback on its actual content. That is a major component of our next training for the mandatory training for the board members that will be in September. We're doing a full, I think it's currently scheduled for 5 hours to cover a whole host of these topics, but including that sort of policy and procedure manual, in addition to the additional ethics training, the open meeting law training, the zoning, principles of zoning law and case law training, all of that sort of in our next training session that's going to be in September.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will transition to the rest of public testimony and the order of signups. I'm so sorry, I lost my list again. Okay, this is it. No. Okay, I apologize. Oh, here it is. Okay. Next up was Mike Skolka. Is Mike still here? I don't see Mike anymore. Lydia Lowe. Oh, okay. Lydia's. Oh, okay. You're both. Okay. Carrie's ahead of me. Thank you. Mike, Lydia, Maria, and John. And I think that's everyone at that point. Great. Mike, please go for it.
Cool. Thank you. 1 second. All right. Thanks, Councillor Wu and Councillor Edwards, and thank you to the other councillors for sharing your thoughts. Lots of good comments there. I appreciate the testimony of everyone speaking at the meeting. Now, regardless of how broken or not broken the current ZBA process is, that doesn't matter, because we should always be focused on how we can improve all our agencies and processes. Good enough is really never good enough for our city and its residents. Now, obviously, the zoning code needs to be updated, and I agree that variances should reflect actual hardships. And I also think that issues surrounding short-term rentals, billboards, and most business zoning processes should not be dealt with at the ZBA. But for now, I choose to focus on what I find most concerning. The voice of the community is not adequately represented in ZBA processes. Now, how do we fix that? First, we need a defined community process for projects that seek building permits and variances. From first notifying residents about an abutters meeting all the way through seeking community support and attending the actual hearing, there needs to be formal regulations that all projects must abide by. This is a simple change and really the bare minimum, but it is a good starting point. Secondly, once we've defined that process, the community process, we need to educate the community about the process. This is simple but endlessly important, right? Presentations to community organizations, recorded webinars, but also a staff geared towards offering appropriate customer service, listening to people's concerns and answering their questions. Right now in the community, there is often a sense that it is residents versus ISD, residents versus the ZBA, and so on. It's not a healthy way to operate. It's a disservice to Bostonians, and also it's a disservice to city employees and elected officials who often appear pitted against the community. It's not fair to anyone. We can do better, and we need to do better. Lastly, it's concerning to me and my neighbors that the ZBA doesn't adequately represent Boston's residents. I recommend we make plans to move away from a centralized zoning board and move towards a community-based model. Community boards could be created based on city council districts, for example. Membership in them could be based on community organizations, civic and neighborhood associations, but also groups that advocate for affordable housing, groups that advocate for tenants' rights, and so on. This will allow for the actual voice of the community to be represented. And I understand that this would make the process of approving projects complicated, but it would allow for actual community input. And that's what we need for Boston. We need actual community members making the actual decisions. I could say more. I look forward to continuing this discussion, and I'd love the opportunity to dig into details on how to make these improvements. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. I look forward to talking again soon, and I hope you all have an excellent day.
Thank you, Mike. Lydia.
Thank you. And my name is Lydia Lowe, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Chinatown Community Land Trust, which is a resident-led organization in Chinatown. I don't have a really prepared statement. I actually totally agree with everything that Mike Skolka just said. But I just wanted to offer a few points of input that that are really based on the experience and a lot of the frustrations that Chinatown community residents and property owners have had with the current process. First, the hearing process is completely confusing and overwhelming. A member of ADCO very aptly called it a chaotic stream of consciousness jumble of everything. And so I think that, often we go to these hearings, people have taken off work. We're trying to figure out how to do translation for people who don't understand English. And before we even realize that our case is up, the thing is gavelled through already. So we have experienced that multiple times. And it's, I think that separating the routine homeowner occupant items from the more business items would be a big help. Second, I agree that it's very important to expand and broaden the types of representation on the Zoning Board of Appeals, particularly coming from affected community residents, who are most affected by these decisions, but also for some kinds of community advocates with particular kinds of expertise around the environment, health, civil rights, and so on. And the way that the ZBA is currently dominated by those with a direct financial interest in development and construction or major institutions, just really makes that potential for conflicts of interest greater, or at least the appearance of conflicts of interest. So I fully support that proposal for broader representation. Third, there really needs to be a higher bar for requesting a variance, like everyone has been saying, that it should be a documented and demonstrated unusual hardship, so that variances are the exception instead of the rule and zoning is actually meaningful. And even more so for what are so-called forbidden commercial uses in a zone or in a district. Fourth, applicants, especially for forbidden uses, should be limited in the number of deferments that they can use to wear down the opposition. It's really outrageous that residents have to take off time from work, arrange for childcare, and go to hearing after hearing, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times, only to find out at the last minute that the applicant has deferred again. And they keep doing it until finally there's that one hearing where people miss it and then it gets gavelled through. And finally, I really agree that the idea that the track record of a business or developer who's applying for any kind of variance or any kind of permit, that their track record on labor law violations, failure to pay taxes, their record on no-fault evictions, tenant harassment, or any other concerns like that really need to be part of the public record that's under consideration when they're applying for any type of city approval, permit, variance, or license. So those are just a few of our ideas, and I thank you and thank the committee for taking on this super important issue. Bye.
Thank you, Lydia. Maria.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you for having this hearing and for allowing us to comment. First of all, I live at 176 Walnut Street in the Port Norfolk section of Dorchester, and I have been an IAG member of a few projects with the BPDA. My first couple of comments are about the BPDA. It seems as though when the BPDA Article 80 project comes up, that the zoning code is just thrown out the window. And I don't know if that's right or if it's fair, but that's what it seems to be. Also, in my neighborhood, there have been 5 Article 80 projects recently. So 2 have been approved, a few are still ongoing, and an electronic billboard. And even with all of that, and many smaller projects as well, there is no comprehensive plan for the Neponset, Port Norfolk area. I hear about plan this, all around the city where the community is involved. We have asked the BPDA for a comprehensive plan for our neighborhood, and they tell us no, that our zoning is good. So we should keep just using that, but then they throw out the zoning and do whatever they want. So it's just not fair. Also, the comment about Zoom and in person, I think at least the IAG meetings can be started to go back into in person or a combined hybrid, because an IAG meeting needs a give and take. You can't just have 2 minutes of testimony and then it's shut off. Now, as far as the ZBA is concerned, I just want to, reaffirm basically what everybody else just said, that the lengthy deferrals don't work. The lack of communication doesn't work between the mayor's office, especially ONS and the neighborhoods. The interpretation of the code isn't working. Forbidden should be forbidden. The ZBA should not be functionally rezoning the city by disregarding the code. The ZBA and BPDA, by the way, approval of the Boston Bowl electronic billboard is a prime example of what can go wrong. And yes, the BPDA also approved this billboard, and I don't know why. Now, as far as what is happening right now with the ZBA, I've been on at least, I want to confirm what the woman from the North End said. I've been on at least 2 hearings with the BPDA where she did not allow public comment. And this is wrong, and it needs to be corrected. And this isn't something that needs a huge law regulation change or whatever. This is just wrong. Otherwise, the proponent can make untrue and misleading statements that no one refutes. No one is able to refute them, and that is what happened with the 2 hearings that I was waiting to testify along with multiple neighbors, and we just were not allowed. She bangs the gavel and says we're going to go right to the vote. So something needs to be done about that. And I know they're busy, and I understand, but add more hearings if you have to. But you cannot just not let the public testify. That's probably, I'm assuming that's illegal. The written testimony, you're never sure if anyone is even reading that. Hopefully they are. And one more thing, I know I'm on an automated list for BPDA public hearings, for conservation public hearings. Is there an automated email list for the hearings of the ZBA? I can't seem to find one. Maybe it's there and I just haven't found it. If there isn't, there should be. So thank you very much for letting me testify.
Thank you. John, are you available?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, city councilors. You have been wonderful when we have expressed our frustration at what is going on at the ZBA. I'll give two specific examples in a simple way that you can correct it. The Boston Bowl is one of what will be a plethora of applications. Electronic billboards are extremely profitable and they are obnoxious to a lot of people. And in the Boston Bowl case, there were several problems. One is that there were many deferrals, and when none of us were at a meeting, it was approved. I was at several meetings where a deferral was granted. Second, it was mentioned in the proposal when the Neighborhood Services Department came up that this was a conditional use, and it wasn't. It was a forbidden use, and that makes a difference, and there was no one there to correct that. Third, the abutters who were notified were just the two businesses on either side of the Boston Bowl, because that's the 300-foot limit, whereas the electronic billboard was affecting people blocks and miles away. And that made no sense whatsoever. So on the Boston Bowl, the ZBA should never have been involved. This was a major issue that the city had conscientiously looked at and limited electronic billboards to 3 small areas. Moving to a second one that I live at 185 Mass Ave, and I'm on the Fenway Civic Association board and a delegate to the Alliance of Downtown Civic Associations, ADCO. The second issue that I've been very involved with is affordable housing. And a great limitation on affordable housing has been made by allowing executive suites to rent out on a nightly basis. And the ZBA should not have ever been involved in allowing the change from residential, which we desperately need, to executive suite, which really upsets the neighborhood and limits affordable housing. I thank you very much for the concentration you've had. I worry a little bit that Chris English can get away with saying, well, it should have been completed by June, but we're just thinking about it still. He didn't submit a report as to what he suggested instead of what was required in June. He just says, well, this is a tough issue. Well, that's not what was requested by the, was ordered by the executive order. What was ordered was a report by a certain date. So I thank you all. I appreciate the hard work that Chris puts in and the BPDA puts in, but it is not neighborhood friendly. And both of them need to understand that we care about our neighborhoods. Actually, I'm looking out right now from my window at 1 Dalton and 30 Dalton. and both of them prevent me from seeing the sky. Now, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever for a project that some developer wants to do for their financial interest. And electronic billboards are going to be a major, major problem, just as executive suites were. Thank you all very much. And the hearing was terrific. I didn't hear hardly anybody say, oh, this is a system which is working, because it's not working, it's broken. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So I see one other person with a hand raised whose name on Zoom is just listed as East Boston. So if we could add this person into the main room to testify. And then I know Victor had wanted to save his comments until the end. So then we can go to Victor after that. And I will just put in a word, we appreciate the administration for their time on all of these hearings and know that the council plays an important role in accountability. I will personally vouch for Chris that he's always deployed to the thorniest special projects all across the city. And I can tick off a number of them, including short-term rentals back in the day. Often folks who are here are the messenger on behalf of many other layers above that as well. Okay, so if the person whose name is East Boston, would you like to testify? And if you could please identify yourself.
Hi, yes. I have a community group and we're just listed underneath this and I couldn't change it, but my name is Joni DeMarzo from 435 Frankfurt Street in East Boston. And I just wanted to say, with the ZBA and their approvals, it seems really concerning that we'll have opposition from abutters. We'll have over 100 residents of East Boston that sign petitions that are in opposition. Sometimes Lydia Edwards will go up there, Councilor Lydia Edwards will say she's in opposition and it still gets approved. So something with 11 variances getting approved with all this opposition, yet something like somebody wanting to extend their living space gets denied, makes it seem like there's a hidden agenda that profit is more important than the people. The accountability for the zoning board to be responsible for violating their own codes. In Article 7, Section 3, it says the Board of Appeals shall grant a variance only if it finds that all of the following conditions are met, such as there being a hardship. I had one attorney tell me that, there is no hardship. Hardships don't matter because the ZBA approves everything. And it's like, well, what are we doing here? Why are abutters even asked to join the call? I had the chairwoman, the ambassador, put me on mute before I could even get 3 words out. It's like they don't even want to hear you complain. The decision has already been made. And if it's going to profit the city, the people don't matter. And it's really sad. People are being displaced. Families are leaving from the burdens of these overdeveloped condos. They're only being built for the rich. They're 1-bedroom apartments with roof decks and bike racks because there's not enough space for all the parking. Families aren't going to move on to roof decks with little children. Families aren't going to take their kids to soccer practice on bikes. And it's just, when is it going to stop? We don't have all the time in the world. And by the time that you guys actually figure out a better system, we're all going to be gone.
Thank you, Joni. Victor, could you close us out, please?
Now I'm unmuted, right? Okay. Well, thanks for letting me wait until the end because a lot of the issues that I would have raised have been raised. So I think what I'll do is focus on my suggestion for a cure of several of the issues which I will mention. And my suggestion is rules of procedure. That is deferrals. How many deferrals? Who can ask for deferrals? Is it limited only to the proponent? Shouldn't objectors be entitled to ask for deferrals? That should be covered in rules of procedure. There are too many items on the agenda, which is why a lot of things get pushed through. The council, perhaps, the ISD, I don't know who would take the responsibility for preparing rules of procedure. should say there can only be X number of items on an agenda. And interestingly, the ZBA website explains that the ZBA members get paid per diem. If the length of the agenda is cut in half, it will require twice as many days, and their income will double. I can't imagine the ZBA objecting to that. Why isn't it done? Another issue that can be cured by rules of procedure is the testimony in support and testimony in opposition, that there shall be testimony in support, testimony in opposition, and that it should carry through the entire day, because in my experience, I've noticed that in the morning, when there seems to be plenty of time and things seem to be relaxed, the chair permits opposition. I've heard the chair say at 4 o'clock, we have to finish at 4:30 and not permit opposition to be presented. Another reason why the agendas should be shorter. Letters, who reads the letters? I'm chair of the Zoning Licensing and Construction Committee of the North End Waterfront Residents Association. I don't know who reads the letters we write after we vote to support or oppose and give reasons. If anyone does read the letters, do they pay any attention to the reasons? I am not aware of that, but perhaps that could be covered in rules of procedure. Finally, I want to pick up on what the last commenter stated about the zoning code that requires more than just hardship, and that it for a variance. And I would like to remind the council, although the council knows this, but also the public in general, that back in 2005, 15 years ago, the Superior Court was so frustrated with getting these appeals from the Board of Appeal that violated the zoning code. The Superior Court judge, the case is Van Buren versus South Boston New Housing. And if there are lawyers there, I'm sure you know it, but anyway, it's in 18 Mass Law Report, page 703. The Superior Court judge went on and referred to the waste of the public and private resources of builders, developers, opposing neighbors, landowners, the board itself. The Superior Court judge suggested that the city law department should get into the act, and perhaps the board and the city government should deploy their legal resources in accomplishing the improvement. Otherwise, that institutional deficiency will continue to generate unreliable decisions and wasteful litigation. Well, that was 15 years ago. Just now, 2 months ago, the same thing reached the Superior Court. The judge in this case didn't go into the detail that the judge in the Van Buren case did. But the judge said here the decision is invalid on its face. That is the decision of the ZBA, and cited the requirements of the code, which say that the provisions of this code would deprive the appellant of the reasonable use of such land or structure. In order to support a variance, you have to show that. Well, if you've been living in a house that has, say, a three-family house that's been in existence for 100 years in the North End, how can you say that the relief you're asking for, if it's not given, would deprive you of the reasonable use? It's been used. It makes no sense. So I would just now like to step from the specific to the general and point out something that I pointed out.
Summarize the general in just about 2 sentences, and then we have to move on.
Okay.
We're at time for the hearing.
I suggest a study commissioned by either the council or the next mayor that delves into how other cities across the country or across the world deal with the issue of specific parcels. The zoning code covers neighborhoods, neighborhood districts. It covers sub-districts, multifamily residential, community commercial, and so forth, but it doesn't drill down into individual parcels. There is obviously a need for that. I suggest that not a law firm, perhaps the MIT Urban Planning Department, perhaps Harvard Kennedy School of Government, something like that, make a study, a survey and a study, a report and a recommendation on how this broken system can be improved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I see Brian has a hand raised. Did you have a comment, Brian? And I'm going to check one more time. So the only other person is Jeff Hampton in the waiting room. Jeff, did you want to speak on anything either? Okay.
Yeah, so I'll be really quick. Because a couple people brought up the digital sign of Boston Bowl, and I was pretty sure when I said that we never, we always oppose electronic signage. So that sort of threw me for a loop a little bit. So we did some looking, and in fact, we recommended, the BPDA did recommend denial without prejudice. And in the ZBA's decision, it said the sole opposition voiced at the hearing and filed with the board was the BPDA's. So I think we're maintaining our batting average here with opposing those things. But I just want to make sure I clarified that, because I think some folks might have gotten the impression that BPDA had supported digital signage, and we don't.
Thank you very much. Jeff, did you want to add anything?
No, Counselor. Thank you. My boss did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you for being here as well. All right. So I think we have gone through everyone who patiently stayed for public testimony, and really appreciate all of your time. This will conclude our hearing on docket. Oh dear, I keep losing my page here. Okay, here we go. This will conclude our hearing on docket number 0372, order for a hearing on the ZBA and the home rule petition filed by the City Council. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Carrie.
No problem. Thanks, Shane.